You're listening to Tea with Tolkien, a podcast for the Hobbit at heart. Hello and welcome, and thank you so much for listening. If this is your first time tuning into our podcast, my name is Caitlin, and I'm so happy that you found us. This podcast and everything I do at Tea with Tolkien is meant to inspire you and encourage you to read more Tolkien and become more of a Hobbit at heart, as I like to say. We are currently in the middle of a 20-week book club in which we are reading through the Silmarillion together. The Silmarillion is usually considered Tolkien's most difficult work, but it is also his most important in my opinion, and so my goal for this book club is really to help anyone who might have been intimidated by the Silmarillion, or who might have been distracted or confused or lost along the way. We are on the 6th week of our book club, and things are getting pretty crazy in Valinor, if I do say so myself. We are on chapters 6 and 7, and this week is very exciting because we finally learn what a Silmaril is, and that explains the title. I remember the first time I read this book, and I was just like reading on and on and on and on, and then you get to this chapter and you're like, oh, that's where the title came from. So let's get to it. Quintus Silmarillion, Chapter 6, of Feanor and the Unchaining of Melkor. Now the three kindreds of the Eldar were gathered at last in Valinor, and Melkor was chained. So as this chapter opens up, everything is going very lovely. Everyone's having a great time except Melkor, and what could possibly go wrong? It is in this time that the Noldor first invented letters, which is very cool. Finwë, if you'll remember who Finwë is, he is the king of the Noldor. He was wed to Miriel, and their son Feanor was born. However, after the birth of Feanor, Miriel languished and was unable to continue living. She went to Lorien to rest, but her spirit departed from her body, and she went to the halls of Mondos. Tolkien writes, but in the bearing of her son, Miriel was consumed in spirit and body, and after his birth she yearned for release from the labor of living. And as someone who has experienced kind of like a difficult period after having a baby, which I'm not sure might have been postpartum depression now that I look back on it, I can't help but relate to the exhaustion that Miriel felt in this chapter, and I found a lot of comfort in the way that Tolkien wrote about it with so much tenderness and understanding. And I'm not sure if Tolkien was maybe close to someone who had experienced this kind of like exhaustion of the soul. But it's just another example of how great he was at writing and how much care he took to develop his characters. So after this, Finwë was grieved at the loss of his wife, and he was alone in Valinor, deprived of joy. So he was the only one who had experienced any kind of loss at this point, because everything was still very blissful and new. I mean, obviously the Valar had experienced sadness. I'm talking about the Eldar. But no, that doesn't really make sense, though, because Olwë had lost his brother. But I think Tolkien means that Finwë was grieved in this very like specific kind of way at losing his wife and the mother of his son, I guess. He visited her body in Lorien and called to her, but after a while he stopped coming and focused on raising his son Feanor. Feanor grew swiftly and was the most subtle in mind and skilled in hand of the Noldor. Tolkien writes, Feanor grew swiftly, as if a secret fire were kindled within him. Few ever changed his courses by counsel, and none by force. He became of all the Noldor, then or after, the most subtle in mind and the most skilled in hand, and he it was, first of the Noldor, discovered how gems greater and brighter than those of the earth might be made with skill. Feanor was married to Nerdanel. And after a time, Finwë took his second wife, Indis. They had 2 children together, Fingolfin and Finarfin, and Feanor was not pleased with his father's marriage and had little love for his stepmother or half-brothers. Meanwhile, after completing his 3 ages in prison, Melkor was brought before the Valar to sue for pardon. Manwë granted Manwë granted him pardon, but Melkor was required to remain inside the gates of Valinor. After a while, though, Melkor was allowed to leave and roam freely. Tolkien writes, "For Manwë was free from evil and could not comprehend it, and he knew that in the beginning, in the thought of Ilúvatar, Melkor had been even as he, and he saw not to the depths of Melkor's heart, and did not perceive that all love had departed from him forever." This quote and the whole idea of Manwë, despite being so powerful and wise, was also so naive concerning Melkor. I thought it was really interesting because Manwë is completely free from evil. And it just made me think, like, have you ever had a friend that's just like too pure for this world, and they are so full of goodness that that the idea of evil is just like incomprehensible for them? And it kind of reminds me of hobbits in the way of how they're so like simple and good. I thought this connection between Manwë and the hobbits, in a very small, like a loose connection, I thought it was kind of interesting. Melkor most hated the Eldar, and so he feigned love for them, seeking out their friendship and plotting their downfall. He specifically targeted the Noldor. Why do you guys think that he chose the Noldor specifically? I'm sure we'll have a very good discussion about this in our Discord. Okay, and now on to Chapter 7 of the Silmarils and the Unrest of the Noldor. Finally, the Silmarils. Feanor made in secret the Silmarils, 3 jewels which contained the light of the 2 trees of Valinor. The heart of Feanor was bound to the Silmarils, and Melkor lusted for them. Melkor conspired to destroy Feanor and end the friendship between the elves and the Valar. He turned the sons of Finwë and many of the Noldor against one another. He told them various lies about the Valar, men, and each other, and he introduced to them the idea of creating weapons. So here they are. Melkor's influence on them is just like growing and growing, but they don't really realize it because he's so cunning that they think a lot of these things are their own ideas. But eventually it gets to a breaking point. Finwë summoned his kindred to discuss this unrest that had been growing, and Fingolfin arrived early and urged his father to denounce Feanor's rebellious words and plans. But Feanor showed up fully armed and accused Fingolfin of trying to usurp him. At this point, Feanor is completely losing his mind, and he draws his sword upon his half-brother in front of everyone. And so the unrest of the Noldor was no longer hidden. The Valar brought Feanor before the Ring of Doom, and he was sentenced to 12 years in exile. So Feanor left Tirion, and the Silmarils were locked away. After this, Melkor was not heard from for a long time. But after a while, Melkor came to Feanor and offered to help him. He did the whole... I thought this was actually, when I was reading this chapter, I thought it was interesting the way that Melkor offers to help Feanor. And like, oh, I'll help you keep the Silmarils safe. Just let me, I'll hold them for you. I'll help you out. And it reminded me a lot of the way that Boromir tempted Frodo in the end of the Fellowship of the Ring. Just like, oh, it's such a burden. Like, I'll help you out. I know what to do. I can help you. I'm strong and wise. And I thought it was kind of similar. However, Melkor kind of betrayed himself by kind of being a little too forward about it. And Feanor was like, hey, watch it. Like, you just get out of here. And then Melkor fled. The Valar searched for him, but were unable to find him. And that is where this chapter ends. Next week, we will discuss chapters 8 and 9 of the Darkening of Valinor and of the Flight of the Noldor. I hope you all are having a lovely week and that you are staying safe out there if you're being affected by this winter storm. I know it's hitting us right now because I'm actually recording this podcast like 1 hour before I'm releasing it because we're behind on everything due to all this snow and crazy weather. But I'm praying for those of you who live in areas that aren't equipped to handle such low temperatures. I know that a lot of the snow is coming as a surprise for a lot of people. So if you are not used to driving in the snow, please remember to slow down. Like, that's really the only trick to driving on the snow is just drive slowly. And I feel very worried about all of you. So I'm thinking of all of you, and I hope that you can stay safe and warm. And if you aren't having any snow, then I hope you have a lovely week as well. I will see you guys next week.